Thank you all. Do we have our elder?
Nope, he's not here yet. I think he was still trying to get through security.
Okay. Well, thank you, and thank you to the press for being here this morning. You know, I'm going to ask Chief Monias to say a very quick prayer to start this off in a good way, and we'll ask our elder to close us off.
Thank you, National Chief. Sen teemat nanaskamat naanot sa pitigaruta tiana mutamagoma ipagitin sunio. Naaskamano man tumen naanot sa isia questa merpaniga yon tipis kotta mak min etta petago argentinimena nagaga namse naseti spanigoma hagoyo tasketi nikia kesundiamena e peminigoya hagimina utataya taskinanak. Sönamigo tagaya sagmina sönami indinimenak. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Thank you, Chief, for the opening prayer. Chimigwach, that's always so important to our people. That's what gets us through some of these hard days and hard history that we've all faced together. I know that our prayer and our faith has always carried us through, so I want to thank you for that. I also want to acknowledge that we're on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, and I want to thank them for welcoming us here today. I also want to thank you for attending today, each and every one of you, to discuss the 2024 federal budget that was released yesterday. I want to recognize Regional Chief Mitchell, my colleague who stands beside me, who will be speaking shortly, in particular about some of the housing and infrastructure elements of the budget. And I also want to acknowledge our chiefs that stand here with us. You know, they're at the front line, and I think that it's important that we hear from them. I also want to thank our dedicated team at the Assembly of First Nations for working together. They spent the better part of the evening and early this morning going through this budget's 490 plus pages. And we want to start by saying that we are welcome and appreciate new investments proposed for First Nations health, children, education, and for the new business loan guarantees program for large projects. However, analyzing the budget's proposals for housing, policing, roads, and water fall far short of closing the long-standing infrastructure gaps that create so many difficulties for First Nations people. Last week, the Assembly of First Nations and the federal government co-released a report identifying the infrastructure gap among First Nations to be over $350 billion. Earlier this month, Canada's Auditor General released 2 reports detailing a distressing and persistent pattern of failure in federal First Nation housing and police programs. These reports, with the result of the Saskatchewan mass stabbing inquiry, demonstrate long-term investments and fundamental shifts in approach are required over an extended period. Unfortunately, we are not seeing that here today. We did not see that in yesterday's budget. So we will be reaching out to the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister to discuss a path forward. Given our special relationship, I expect the First Nation component will be implemented with each of the budget's major investments announced yesterday. We will also be talking with representatives of the opposition parties on what is missing from this budget. We've reached out to Pierre and to Jagmeet as well, and we will be reaching out to all other political parties later this week. And we will be inviting the Prime Minister and the Deputy Minister to attend our National Assembly in Montreal and, of course, here in Ottawa next December to explain their budget choices directly to chiefs who are at the front line. So today we will be renewing our call for the Prime Minister to organize a First Minister's meeting over the coming year to address these long-standing issues and facilitate an open discussion about how to keep reconciliation moving forward for the future prosperity. And so now more than ever, we need to be working together in a good way to make sure First Nations and Canada achieve our full potential by working together, pulling together, and continuing on the path of reconciliation, which unfortunately I did not hear in the speech yesterday. And I think that there needs to be a renewed commitment towards that and a renewed commitment to partnership. And so I'm going to next ask my colleague, Regional Chief Brendan Mitchell. Thank you.
Thank you, National Chief. And good morning, everyone. Nice to be here on Parliament Hill on a sunny morning. Cold, though. I'm glad I wore a coat when I came in this morning. So my name is Brendan Mitchell. I am the Regional Chief for Newfoundland, but I'm the policy or portfolio holder for housing and infrastructure at the Assembly of First Nations. I want to thank National Chief Cindy Woodhouse Nepinak for important and insightful words today. We really appreciate her as a leader of the Indigenous people of this country. And I would like to also acknowledge Chief Moniz for his opening prayer this morning. I'll begin by echoing the National Chief's words on the disappointment with the federal budget that we heard about yesterday. While the budget does cover some areas, including health, education, children, and yes, provides for business loans guarantees, the budget does not make significant investments for First Nations need to see, particularly in the critical areas of housing and infrastructure. This country is facing a housing crisis, and sadly, our communities make up a significant portion of those facing inadequate and, yes, unsafe housing. And we can tie in a whole bunch of things with that, including homelessness, the need for improved water situations in our communities, and many other related issues. The recent report of the Auditor General on First Nations housing made clear that the cost of not making investments on behalf of First Nations will have long-term consequences. Adequate housing is a human right, and our communities deserve more than failed promises. The federal government's distressing pattern of failure must be addressed through real partnership and recognition of our rights to self-determination. More action, more investments are needed. We have to do more than just words. We urge government to remember and honor their legal, treaty, and fiduciary obligations to First Nations and all Canadians by fully investing in the solutions developed by First Nations for transformative change. And transformative change requires constant and sustained investments. Now is the time to build on the progress to date and to continue to work together to advance First Nations priorities. Reconciliation can pave a way towards a more inclusive and equitable economic future for all First Nations and, yes, Canadians included. I was expecting to see what I refer to as a reconciliation budget yesterday. I'll say it this way. What I expected to see was a reconciliation budget, and we did not see it. I remember being with the Prime Minister in large meeting rooms, two times at least, where he stated that my main or first priority as Prime Minister is into Indigenous people of this country. And I really was hoping to see more. We talk about reconciliation. It suggests moving forward together in the spirit of mutual respect and positive change. We're not seeing a lot of positive change. And the change we need with respect to housing and infrastructure in this country on behalf of Indigenous people and communities requires a faster pace of action. In a recent interview I had with another media group, I was asked the question, how do you feel about the likelihood of closing the infrastructure gap by 2030? I didn't need much time to reflect on my answer, but my view is that we're going to be far from having a closure of that gap by 2030, and I expect the gap will even further widen as we go forward. Anyway, my fear and concern is that we're going to be in a worse position in 2030, in 2035, and 2040 by what's been happening in terms of the relationship with this government and our own communities. There's a lot of work to be done. We have to bring the well-being of our people and our communities to a much greater level and meet. That's what's happening in our non-Indigenous communities and to non-Indigenous people in this country. So thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity, and maybe we'll have some questions in a bit. Thank you.
Thank you. We have our third speaker will be Grand Chief Kathy Merrick from the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. Following her will be Grand Chief Abram and then Chief Moniz. Thank you.
Gusane Nanaskaman Epis Vicevitakuk. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional territory that we are on today, and that we be able to give thanks to our relatives for allowing us to be here to be able to do that. And so we know that Canada's budgetary process is a critical tool in shaping the nation's future. And yesterday, Canadians heard how the federal government plans to spend resources for the coming months and years. Yet this process is marred by a glaring omission. And I was there yesterday to be able to hear, and I did not hear any words pertaining to reconciliation, unfortunately. The exclusion of First Nations treaty partners. We are the treaty partners with the Crown. We are the only people that have a treaty with the Crown as First Nations people. As the backbone of Canadian history and identity, these partnerships and nation-to-nation agreements demand inclusion and respect in budget preparations, in discussions, in Treasury Board submissions. I don't even know if there's a Treasury Board, and decisions. Canada's budget should reflect its commitment to reconciliation with First Nations. And we have heard the word time and time again from governments, from leaders, from Prime Minister, and we need to ensure that we understand the meaning of reconciliation. Those are empty words that I've heard, and it's unfortunate that we have to hear the words without any meaning. So what we see instead is transfer of millions of dollars to provincial governments already ahead of the budget announcements, with no consultation with the treaty partners, which are the leaders, which are the chiefs of every nation on Turtle Island. This exclusion of First Nations voices perpetuates systematic injustice and undermines the principle of quality and partnerships. These transfer payments have also led to court challenges and compensation settlements in hundreds of millions, as provincial governments have been found to have spent these resources not as intended. So it's the transfer payments of the federal government to the provinces. So by the time it gets to First Nations, out of $1, we get the dime. It goes through so many levels to be able to do that. And what can you do with a dime? How does the government expect our people to live when there's adequate housing for our people, health services for our people? We have premature deaths in our communities because they cannot access health services. And it's sad. It's a sad day. And that we be able to do better. And we be able to ensure that every MP understands treaties between First Nations. And that we be able to do that work, and that we be able to work together to be at the same table, and that we come to be able to do the work. So the last 3 fiscal years, the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs have submitted a pre-budget submission. It tabled copies of the alternative budget, federal budget for Manitobas and First Nations. But this work has clearly articulates the financial costs, improving the well-being of First Nations in this province, the province of Manitoba, is overlooked and given no consideration. We do the work, we have experts that do our work that are able to compile this data, and we send it off to everybody. but it doesn't seem to reach anybody's ears. So that has to change. So Canada prioritized investments in First Nation-led initiatives and capacity enhancements efforts. Empowering First Nations to govern their own affairs and develop their economies is essential for building sustainable, prosperous nations. So we need to be able to do that. So in conclusion, Canada's budgetary process must recognize and honor its treaty obligations to all our people. Egusane.
Thank you, Grand Chief. I'll now call up Chief Abram, and then we'll have a quick word from Chief Monias, and then we'll go into Q&A. Thank you.
Sego, good morning. My name is Abram Baddick. I'm the Grand Chief of the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne, but I'm also representing Ontario Regional Chief Glenn Hare, who was unable to join us this morning. I spent yesterday talking a lot about the budget and what we were expecting from First Nations perspective and from Ontario's perspective. We released our report last week with the collaboration of the federal government, and the numbers were alarming. But it wasn't surprising to us. We knew that the gap continues to grow. We knew that the gap is there, and the government has set a date, 2030, to close the infrastructure gap. Ontario region is a large region, and our communities continue to grapple with housing shortages, as the rest of the nation does. We need the federal government to work with our communities. Those budget announcements were made. There was no carve-outs made for our people leading up to the budget. So then when we hear the budget, we were already disappointed. We see some new spending in different areas, but we know that the infrastructure in our communities continues to crumble. Overcrowding continues to be a reality for a number of our communities. Our remote communities, it's even worse. Access to clean drinking water continues to be a priority for our communities. So when we see announcements that don't include us, there's no carve-outs for us, the province doesn't always come to the table, at least in Ontario, around housing, around clean drinking water, which means that programs that are designed to partner between the federal government and the provincial government don't include First Nations. And this is why we have a continued gap, continues to grow. 2030 was a commitment that was made by the Government of Canada. And we know that the investments that were made yesterday will not help close that gap. It does not even meet nearly the need. And while we continue, every community in Ontario, every community across this Turtle Island continues to want to partner with the government, with the provinces, or proponents to close that infrastructure gap, to bring prosperity to our people, to ensure that our families have homes over their roof, safe homes and safe drinking water. Today, we are here to share that message and to continue to share with Canadians that there's an obligation, there's a historic relationship between our people coast to coast, through treaties, through wampums, and that we continue to call on the government to live up to those obligations. So, down we go.
Thank you. Thank you. Chief Monias.
Thank you, everybody. My name is David Monias, of Chief the Sovereign Nation, Pimichikimak, and witnessed the budget reading yesterday. We were told yesterday that there would be good news and there would be bad news. Good news for Canada, bad news for the First Nations. That's what it comes down to, literally. For those people that experienced COVID, it uncovered homelessness, lack of housing, lack of health care, lack of infrastructure, and lack of education resources for our people to continue to get the resources that they need. That didn't happen. That was not addressed yesterday, in my view. I wish it would have been better news for us. But we continue to challenge the government to prove me wrong. What I'm saying is wrong. But the money that's being set aside is right now going to be put on a table, just slightly out of our reach. And we're going to fight as First Nations, fight amongst each other for that scrap of money that's there, for what's being put to us. That's what it comes down to. And I'll be fighting for every piece I can get as well for my community. We have 2,000 people on the homeless list that need homes. And those homes need infrastructure. They need water and sewer, clean, running, reliable water. to maintain our health and wellness in our communities. I was hoping for better news when I came here. But we continue to fight. We continue to fight for our people, for every scrap of money we can get to make sure our people are healthy, that they live longer, they live in a good lifestyle with healthy homes, not rundown homes. And I was hoping for more investment in economic development so we continue to prosper through economic development and give jobs and businesses for our people. So then we don't have to keep on begging for money. Anyways, that's all I have to say. I wish I was standing here, something could happen down with Choi, but I'm not. So with that, we will continue to engage the government as usual and continue to advocate for our people to make sure that they get the best possible deal they can get with whatever's left in there. Thank you.
We'll take questions.
Budget yesterday spoke about unlocking federal lands to build housing. Was the AFN consulted on that, and do you expect it to be consulted on it going forward?
We were not consulted, and I know that our entire team was talking about that this morning. Our legal people were in the, and I mean the problem with that. I'm going to ask actually Chief Abram. He can answer that, and he's been through that process. So.
Absolutely. So we weren't consulted. The current policy that exists under divestiture of federal property, First Nations, it's a priority listing of who gets the first, basically, right of refusal for those federal lands. Unfortunately, First Nations are about third down the list, and that's unacceptable. When our treaty partners, when those are traditional territories that are within all of our lands across Turtle Island, we need to have first priority so that our homes, our communities can continue to prosper like they're offering, what in this case would be to municipalities and cities.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Hey, National Chief. As you hinted, the finance minister's speech was 3,500 words long, and it took 40 minutes to deliver, and not once were Indigenous people or reconciliation mentioned throughout that time. What does that say about how the government is approaching Indigenous people right now?
Well, it's alarming because I think that we've been working in good faith all these years. We continue to stand here. We continue to try our best to work with governments, work with officials to try and get action moving. And I think I gotta say that we have. I know that there was an index that was done just recently. I'm glad that we moved up a little bit, but it's not fast enough. And I think that we need sustained long-term investments in order to close some of these gaps that exist, particularly for our kids on First Nations communities. And I think that, you go home and there's still not self-service in some areas, and there's lack of good roads. There's lack of good access to water and infrastructure in these communities, lack of basic infrastructure, basic schools that are not built. And I know that we have a long way to go in this country. I know that it's not always easy. I know that they can't just lump us in with the province and expect the province to do the right thing, because many times they don't. They want to leave us out and put us in the corner and yin-yang us back and forth between if we're federal or provincial. And we have to renew that relationship. I think I'm glad those discussions happened, some 5 years ago. I think they need to be renewed, and we look forward to talking to the Prime Minister about that, to making sure that our relationship gets prioritized in a good way, that we find actionable items to be done this year. We can't keep waiting and waiting. And I know that there's lots of important work to date, but we're not doing enough, and we have to accelerate that by working together. And by working together and taking the advice of First Nations, if every time that First Nations lead, things go better.
Chiefs, this budget is overtly aimed at Canadians under 40 dealing with housing and affordability issues, for the most part in cities. How concerned are you that the country and government may start to leave First Nations behind again as they turn to these other issues in the mainstream population?
Oh, we're absolutely concerned. We wouldn't be standing here if we weren't. And, if Canada can look at the demographics, First Nations are the fastest growing population in this country. So we can't be leaving them out. We need to make sure that we're targeting that, and they've come through systemic racism throughout the beginning of this country, through residential schools, through day schools, through the 60s scoop, through child welfare, and many of those kids are disadvantaged. And we have to make sure that we're investing in that to give them boots to pull up. If you have never had boots to pull up, how are you going to have anything to move forward with? And so many of these, I sit here and I think of those young people that are under 40, many of them that are homeless on the streets by systemic racism because of, child welfare in this country, for instance, that once they're 18, they kick them out the door. Well, those are our kids on the street. They've been disconnected from our communities, disconnected from our people. And we just have to do a better way of doing things in this country because we have so much potential. And then we do have some young people on First Nations communities that want to, maybe go to university, but there's no internet access in their communities, or they don't have a home to stay in. So they're couch surfing in our communities. And we have, we're not asking for anything more than what any Canadian wants. We want jobs for our kids. We want safe housing. We want access to clean drinking water. And those are, I think that we should all be striving for that. All Canadians, we call on all Canadians to stand with us, and thank many of them that do call to support us day in and day out. So thank you.
National Chief, you mentioned that you plan to reach out to the opposition parties about the budget. Have you received any assurances from the Conservatives about closing the infrastructure gap?
I'm going to be talking to them about that in about a week. I know that I'd put the request in to meet them once again. They've been reaching out already overnight, but I want to meet with the leader himself. So we'll be in touch after I meet with them.
Have they given you any Conservative assurances so far about closing the infrastructure gap and what they would do?
They did. I will say this. I know that the Conservative leader himself had said, what the First Nations want. Well, we have so many documents, and we will be making sure that he receives those, that party receives those, that we write our own for the upcoming federal election, that we all work together to make sure that we have an election document that states what exactly our needs are, so that Canadians can understand it and parliamentarians can understand it on how to close these gaps and how to work together in a better way to have better outcomes. We see in the Auditor General's report when we don't work together and when it's one-sided, it's not working. But we have the solutions, and we look forward to.
Is this the same Liberal government that you remember from 2015 with all of these lofty goals that they promised First Nations in this budget? Like, are you seeing those being the same Liberals as the Liberals that are in power today?
I think that, I want to believe that the intention is well with every political party in this House. I was with a whole bunch of them yesterday, and it was nice to talk to them. But at the same time, we need action, and they need to start. I think there's a bureaucracy out there that people that are there for 30 plus years in government, and we have to work with those people, and I think that they have to realize that this is a new era as well, and we look forward. We have the solutions. Come to the Assembly of First Nations. Come to our communities. And if they're stuck on something, pick up the phone. It's that easy. And we'll be there to help, to try and mitigate some of these issues that exist on health or housing or education. Yeah.
So I want to ask a question about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls measures. Other budgets have had a separate chapter on this, a lot of more investment. It's just kind of mentioned in passing in this budget, and the only funding or new funding is for a red dress alert, which is $1.3 million over 3 years. There's no commitment to making it happen or when it will happen, and it also says regionally as well, because what I've heard in the committee meetings is everybody wants it to be national and sooner than later. So any thoughts on that?
I'm going to leave this question to Grand Chief Merrick.
The MMIWG within the province of Manitoba, we had to negotiate over a year with both the federal and provincial government to get to where we're at in terms of them agreeing to search the landfill. Over a year. It was back and forth, but we do appreciate the fact that they have a commitment of $20 million from the federal government and then $20 million from the provincial government. So, yeah, and in terms of the red dress alert, it's something that is being led by one of the MPs, the NDP MPs for the national, and Manitoba is participating, but it impacts First Nations. This red dress alert, it doesn't apply as to what the national chief has said. Not every First Nation has connectivity in the province of Manitoba. So there's about 20 First Nations that don't have that. So so these are the things that we need to air out and to be able to speak to. Thank you.
And I also had a question about the $5 billion in loan guarantees. It says natural resource and energy projects. I think to a lot of people that means oil and gas projects. Is this, I mean, there seems to be a lot of money available for economic reconciliation, but maybe under what the federal government terms what that is, and this seems to be in it. Does this send a mixed message? There's, in terms of climate change, the government says it wants to fight this, yet it's making a lot of money available for First Nations that might want to pursue oil and gas projects, and I know that it's a very controversial topic amongst a lot of the communities, because a lot of the communities are more interested in green projects and maybe fighting climate change, so just wanted to know if anyone wanted to answer that.
I want to commend Chief Shirlene Gale. I know she's been working on this with the First Nations Major Coalition group. I know that they've been working really hard on that. And there's other groups across this country that have been pushing for this. It's not nearly enough, but it's a good start. And, I think that First Nations taking control of projects and creating jobs and opportunities for themselves within our communities and across this country in partnership with people in this country, I think is a good thing. And I'm glad to see that First Nations, there's many First Nations working on major projects across this country, and I support them. Yeah.
You had mentioned that there were some positives in terms of funding that going into youth and children. There was money that was, I think it was over $1 billion laid out for the new childcare, child and welfare jurisdictions, but we also saw that there were cuts to Jordan's Principle early this year. So I'm just wondering how you feel about the disconnect between those two.
Well, certainly, it's absolutely something that we need to iron out in the months ahead. I know we're still in negotiations on trying to get a final settlement agreement, and there's different parties to that. I can't speak too openly about that, but just know that there is work ongoing every single day in trying to get a final settlement agreement, and we look forward to the continued work, and we know that we have a long way to go on that. But I know that the Jordan's Principle program has been doing its work in our communities, and it's been very helpful. And we don't want to see it underfunded, and we don't want to see it go away, and we need to keep the pedal on that. So we will continue to do that.
Follow up?
Yeah, thank you.
This concludes the press conference. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.